I want to take just a few moments of your time to share with you an exciting project that we have going with the charity for the rest of the year. Before I go any further with that, I want to show you why we are doing this project and who we are helping with it. This child's name is Jane, and we found Jane just 1 kilometre away from where we are building our new children's village, which is a 9-hour drive from our existing one. That area has nobody educating, caring for, or trying to assist children with special needs. Jane's mum has to go to work, and so the only option she felt she had to keep her daughter safe was to peg her to the floor, as you see here. This, of course, is not a way of life for anyone, and Jane has lived that way the whole of her life. What we are trying to do is make sure that we can build a solution that's functional for children like Jane. To do that, we need to raise $200,000 by the end of the year. And to do that, we are hoping to get 2,000 volunteers who will agree to fundraise $25 a month, or if you are blessed enough to be able to share that without fundraising, of course, that's an option, every month for the rest of the year. If 2,000 people can commit to doing this, I know, because I have a working blueprint of the village that we currently have, that I can build a working solution that will be able to provide a loving home for 150 special needs children in that location. I also can say that every dollar will go towards construction. Every dollar. And this is a promise that I know I can make, because after 10 years, I think I'm probably better seated than most human beings to fix this problem. If you want to know more about the project, feel free to reach out, or you can visit the link at the bottom of the screen, www.sharetanzania.com/2000 strong. There you'll find out all the information you need. Thank you for the love and support. We can't do what we do for these children without you. God bless, guys. Bye. As humans, when we move in the whole sphere, the world of spiritual awakening, you can't help at some point to ask about the ego and where it's from, this part of us that makes us suffer. It seems so unnecessary. It seems like such a clumsy design. We say it's because of survival. The ego is built up as a construct around our needs for survival. And when we break down that element of the mind, that element of the technology of the human body, we have these experiences which are deeper, more mystical, have more meaning, more soul to them. When you look at what the ancients said about Eden consciousness, you look at what the Essenes were saying, that there was once a human species who, by the very grace of their state, they had a certain capacity here to influence reality, and therefore the need for desperate survival through intelligence alone was absent. They were guided by a deeper, more innate wisdom than that. We have now to look at it and say why. Christians called it the fall of man. They say that the world is the fallen man is governed by a fallen angel. Many teach and share how to untangle this part of your human anatomy, to awaken back into the voice of the presence of God, back into the Eden consciousness. But if this is only here as a design from natural creation, the origin of all, it's a horrendously clumsy means for us to survive, and also a horrendously clumsy means for us to know the value of unity and oneness consciousness. Because the journey back through the program of the mind takes you to unity. It takes you to a sense of oneness, expansive creation and love. In the meantime, whilst we learn that, we are destroying the planet, destroying other sentient life. And so it seems wholeheartedly clumsy. When I look at a flower blooming, it seems far less clumsy than a human blooming. A human who is destroying the planet in their endless pursuit of desire and pleasure to satiate the void that has happened because of the human body running this program of the ego and separating the vessel from participating in reality with the presence of God, which makes you feel whole. It's clumsy. It doesn't seem somehow to fully fit with the workings of nature. The ancients, they pointed at this part of us, and the Essenes used very beautiful language to point at things. But the vast majority of humans, they are not participating in reality because of words. Most humans see word after word after word, and it's a miserable place to live in consciousness. When you look out at the world and you see the grass and the trees and the flowers and the sky, if you want to participate in that creation, in the open-hearted state of feeling at home, you need to see the artifact and not the words. You see, the words point only, but we forget and we see the words. The word grass points at this amazing occurrence and creation of life. The word tree likewise, the word sky. It points at something. And if you see the word without seeing what it's pointing at, you feel separated. You are struggling in a state of imprisonment away from reality caused by the technology of your own mind. When you can see the sky without the word sky, the mind becomes free. And in that state of freedom, you become free of the character largely. And when that happens, you start to have the full insight, the experiences, the mystical side of life. Most live a terrible life. Word, 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 word. They only see words. It's very, very difficult. I've lived there myself. So inside our human language, we have words that are very clear. They point at something. But what happens when you have to point at something inside the human organism? Something, the workings of the spirit, of the soul, of the psychology. It doesn't have a shape. So how do you point at it? Well, the Essenes were masters of this. They encoded into their texts various different languages that have been lost and forgotten. And so in our human language we have this word lion. And this word, when I say it, no doubt it conjures the image of a certain sentient life form which is a carnivorous being with great power. You know what it conjures, you see it. But what if the word lion was used to point at something else? Because the part of the lion which is not majestic and not nurturing, which is there, I'm very blessed. I am very blessed that I can't count how many times I've been lucky enough and honoured enough to look into the eyes of wild lion out in Tanzania. It's a phenomenal experience. But one thing that is always overriding in those experiences is their power. The power of this life form, of this expression of creation, is very evident. You know that it's ferocious. You know that it can take you out. You know it. If you haven't got a weapon, that is. The Essenes recognized that. They recognized the lion as the ferocious one, the one that can pull you down, that can tear you apart. Because in those days before guns, they were the most terrifying prospect out in the deserts where they were. They were using lion to point at something inside the human vessel. And what they were pointing at is this clumsy element that I speak of. Now, what if this clumsy element of the ego that they point at, that comes from the man that fell, Adam and Eve fell, atom, electron, Adam, Eve, they fell. But I've said recently, to have the notion there was a talking snake in a tree, it has to be symbolic. Has to be. And if you look around at the thread going through the human story, you look at the Sumerian texts and the Mayan texts, and you see that they were saying that we were created, this type of human vessel we are, we were created as a slave species. Was the fall of man the genetic hacking of the human vessel to become a slave, to separate them from the presence of God, Eden consciousness, to make them dependent upon another master, and therefore make them into something that is controllable? Because the first thing that happens when people have spiritual awakenings, I notice, is that they see the enslavement of the planet. It's as if a program of slavery that's hacked into the vessel is written over by the program of the source code, the higher dimension of Christ, the higher dimension of the will of unconditioned love. It writes over this existing code that we've been using, and we start to perceive differently. And we witness the unjust elements of the banking system and the education, which is fragmenting our children, not teaching them to be whole in every moment, but fragmenting them. And it's the first thing you see. And so I've been saying this is an alien slave technology. And so I'm going to use that terminology here. Because these beings who did this, they are the fallen angels of the Bible, we can say. And those fallen ones, they wish to control the whole of creation through intellectual advancement and technology. Much like Lucifer wished to be God. We humans were arguably spliced with their DNA to create a slave species at some point. I'm not saying every interference with a human was negative, but this is what's denoted in the Sumerian text. And doesn't that kind of explain then this ravenous ego that we have that seeks pleasure and destroys the planet? That it's coming from this fallen species who don't wish to be in line with creation, but to dominate it and escape it and control it and be it. They don't wish to surrender to the will of God as it was in Eden. They ignore the will of God and wish to control God through their own arrogance and pride and their intellect, etc. This sense of a separation that they have. And so this slave element of the human technology that enslaves us to the world, to the third dimension. It enslaves us to an identity based only on sight and not on the spiritual. And you see it in the world very clearly, the people like this. And of course, Yeshua said this, but he termed it spirit and flesh. I'm terming it the alien slave technology and the free human being. The one who's awakened, deprogrammed the enslavement technology. The Essenes didn't have technology as we do to perceive that notion, but they still used the language of their time to point at these things. Just as we can say there's an interdimensional species here that's influencing man, something I know because I've seen them and I've taken them off people. They said that you will cast out and drive out demons. When we come online with what the Essenes were saying, they used the word lion to point at what I'm going to term here, the slave technology within you. They used it to point at that. Because, in the same way, in the physical, a lion can tear a man apart in an instant. The slave technology within you, the lower nature within you, the carnality within you, if not kept in check, it too can tear apart the spirit man. The most righteous and pious man, the most godly man, if he allows that slave technology to start writing programs into the stimulation of his intelligence and therefore the action of his body, it will rip him apart just as a lion would in the wild. How do you point at that inside you? They use the word lion. And so you see great stories in the Bible. Samson wrestles a lion with his bare hands. In a state of righteousness, he overcomes the slave technology within him. He awakens to the will of God, not the will of the perceptions of the technology and the 3D self-image that it gives you and the connection only to this 3D matrix, which is, I feel, an original state of creation, the 3D matrix we are in. But that creation, if you look at it like a program, God is the one writing the source code into this program, that this higher dimensional force, the fourth dimensional force, the fallen ones, they hacked the very workings of reality. They're so far advanced technologically, they hacked the very workings of our reality. And therefore this matrix is a fallen world, as a Christian says. Samson wrestles a lion and he overcomes it. You can't beat the slave technology with your fists. Can't be done. But what you can do to overpower it is attain humility in your life. And humility is really a state of consciousness. It's an emptiness, a stillness. What is more humble than a human vessel who is giving itself and its soul to the will of unconditioned love, not the will of the character, the self-image, which is based upon the 3D and its memories. You're basically giving away yourself, your worldly relationships, as Yeshua said, unless you give away unless you leave your mother, your father, your wife, your husband, etc. Unless you do that, you cannot follow me. The perceptions of these relationships, the identity of these relationships can't influence the intelligence and actions of your body when you are trying to manifest a will of Christ, the will of unconditional love, the will of the presence of God into the world. Those must come secondary. And so that state of consciousness is giving the vessel over to a higher force, over to faith and not sight. And this is where you trust in faith. That is humility personified as that state of consciousness, the human vessel that's sitting still, that has eradicated all of its own impulses, desires, its own character traits, etc. And that's the Samson, for all it's represented with this physical struggle, because it is the greatest internal struggle. It's like a man fighting a lion, overcoming that slave technology within you. And the Bible didn't just point at that slave technology with lion. They did it with Goliath, giants, David and Goliath. David takes 5 stones and strikes the giant here, and he kills him. The alien slave technology, the slave technology of the human vessel, is that roaring giant. It's the lion. And David conquers it by overcoming the third dimensional self-image, the 5 senses, and their input alone. And in doing so, he retains the vitality needed so as his energy is potent enough to understand the depths of the truth of what he is, of his being. And that happens because the energy now raises the chrism, the internal sacred secretion, and anoints you in that place, the pineal and the pituitary, which secrete DMT honey. But this is a chemical reaction inside you, but ultimately it's the gateway to your awakened state, the point whereby the soul has been placed inside the technology of the body. It enters through the pineal. the land flowing with milk and honey, DMT serotonin. Samson finds inside the carcass of the lion what? Honey. Because he's overcome the slave technology. We can say this is the Essene code. And I'm not making that up. It's documented in dictionaries of myth and scripture, you should know. What they were pointing at, I feel, is the slave technology. Now it moves on if you look. Daniel is in the lion's den. He's a righteous man and the lions can't touch him. You are in the lion's den every single day because you inhabit this fallen meat suit that has within it a hardware which makes us fall, that we have labelled commonly the ego, or however you want to call it, the slave technology, the flesh, as Jesus called it. You inhabit that. And so every day you're in the lion's den. And the majority of people, sadly, every day, the lion rips them apart because they allow their perceptions to move to the worldly. And when they do that, they separate from the wholeness, the joy, the fulfillment of the presence of God, which is the awakened state, here and now. It's a timeless state of consciousness. Well, therefore, you see the world without time. That means you see it without language and memory. And there you awaken, and in that expansive state of awakening, you enter Eden consciousness, and the voice of God can guide your life. You don't need to toil and sweat as heftily with your intelligence and worry and panic and anxiety, because God takes hold of the vessel and makes use. And you see it, and this is where ultimate faith arises. And so Daniel's in the lion's den, and because he's righteous, he's writing over the top of the slave technology program, the program of the source code of God. His vessel belongs to the higher dimension. The highest dimension is writing into his vessel the code for his existence, and so his perceptions are altered. If he were to fall into the 3D identity and say, I'm Daniel and I have to do this and I've got to do that and let me work out a way to escape these lions, if he were to do that, he will contract his frequency, is how I perceive this from what I've witnessed in outer-body experiences. He will contract his frequency. And as he does that, coming down, imagine rings of dimensions, comes down, and all of a sudden he's contracted into relying on the third dimension and the perceptions of the technology, and therefore the vibration seems to be under the catchment of the fourth dimension, which is the home of the fallen angels, the fallen ones. They have dominion here, so long as we aren't awakened to the higher dimensions beyond them. It's like a river of light. What you sow upstream in the river of light will come to you. But if you can't sow upstream in the river of light, you will be under the catchment of the fallen ones of the fourth dimension. And they will control you. Not only that, sometimes they will inhabit your body, because the connection to your soul is so shaky that they can push that aside and take the driving seat of your vessel. But when the connection to the truth of your soul is potent, it's too vast, they can't enter. And this was the gamble they had, making this slave technology, because they needed to take that spiritual energy from you, because they don't have it in their pursuit of becoming God through technology. They're separated from it. And so they had to design it that way. And the risk was therefore that men like Yeshua will come and awaken humanity to connect to the higher dimensions and see through the veil that they have created here. There was always the risk, because it had to be connected to source, and the technology was always fallible. It wasn't going to make us amnesic of source forever, for all they may have hoped it would. This is a way to perceive this problem that you do face. You are in the lion's den. At any moment, your ego can take you out. You know this, and make you do silly things that you shouldn't be doing. Desires, fleshly impulses. It's not only there, though. In the Nag Hammadi, which is a wealth of mystic literature that should influence our modern day society epically, and the Essenes, of course, played a huge role in this. In there, the second book of Adam and Eve are trying to go into their cave, and as they try to go into their cave, Satan appears as two lions and stops them from going in. So they fast for 3 days, and then God comes and chases away the lions and says to them, Why did you leave and go to the west boundary, return to the east and enter your cave? The Essenes used other words to point. East and right always meant the awakened spiritual state. West meant the opposite. The right hand of God, the promised land is in the east. Cast your net to the right side of the boat, Jesus said. These things matter. They are pointing at something. Cave pointed at representing the human organism who makes the call to go within and ignore sight and the 3D matrix. To go within is to enter the cave, the inner place within you. This even is represented around the world in different cultures as well. In Islam as well, it was the same thing. I won't go too deep into that, but they go inward only after 3 days of fasting, because in front of them is the alien slave technology. They try to go inward to release the perceptions of the 3D identity, and they are met with the alien slave technology, and there it is. And so they fast, they elevate their vibration, bring in the higher frequencies, and write over the bogged down meat suit that they are in the program of the source code. And in doing so, now they can enter within, because the presence of the source code shoos away the slave technology program that's running inside them. Now many will say, but hold on, Yeshua is the Lion of Judah. How can that be? In the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua said, "Blessed is the man who consumes the lion, for the lion will become the man. Cursed is the man the lion consumes, for the man will surely become the lion." Blessed is the man who consumes the alien slave, the slave technology within him, the flesh. Because that flesh will become under his dominion. It will become him. The soul, the spirit man will have control of it. And the opposite is true. If the slave technology writes over, then the whole human vessel will do the bidding of it. It will yearn and seek in the world for pleasure, because it's separated from the wholeness of the presence of the awakened state of the will of God, of the will of unconditional love, the presence of Christ, the presence of God. The man who knows his shadow, who knows that he could be a savage, who knows the depths of the potential depravity of his nature, is a very powerful and dangerous man. Because that man can't be touched very well by fear. In my experience, this is what I've witnessed in my life. This is what I've seen as I've gone around. Yeshua was a man who knew his whole shadow, and therefore the slave technology was owned, controlled, and under the dominion by choice of the will of unconditioned love, of the will of the higher dimensions. This is a very powerful man. Many men will be raised to never know their shadow, and there's always a weakness there because of it. Because if you don't know your shadow, you don't necessarily always have dominion over it. And if you don't know your shadow, fear can get you much easier. I feel I've seen when I've met men like this as well, where they've always been raised to be good, constantly good, and never had a chance to explore the other side of themselves, to look at it, to understand that it's in there. When they do get a chance to look, and they see it, there they can say they've conquered the slave technology in its wholeness, is how I perceive this. I'm not saying I'm 100% correct, it's just how I perceive the journey inwardly of consciousness that I've been on. When you explore the depths of your shadow, you become powerful. The man who has control of the slave technology and is aware that that can rise up inside him, and yet still walks in a righteous path, is a very powerful being. Yeshua was one such being. Very powerful indeed. And therefore, Yeshua had to be the Lion of Judah, the ultimate conqueror of the slave technology, which the word lion was pointing at. And so this is phenomenal. It's important, it's beautiful. Because what it tells us is that these religions, they were pointing at the vastness of the presence of God in a human life. And religion can't really contain that very well. It points at it, but it can't contain that arising, that manifestation, that transformation in consciousness. It can't capture that, because that transformation of consciousness is a timeless state. It's the vessel returning itself here and now to the will of God. Not you as a character, not John returning himself. How can I give my life to God? The character John is the reason that the life didn't belong to God. It's the program that wrote over the top of God's voice and the program of the source code. Your character can't give your life to God. Your human vessel can. When that happens and the vessel is here now, and it says the vessel, not the character, not the persona, the vessel, returns itself here and now to the presence of God. Make use of this human vessel to do the will of unconditioned love. It's timeless. It's timeless. Our language incorporates time, it's linear start-stop. When religious symbology starts and words start, it's trying to capture a timeless state of consciousness with a time-based communication system, and it's very difficult. And the difficult thing is, for most, is they never get to timeless awakening, to the presence of God, because they keep dragging up the self-image based on memory. They keep looking at the world based on memory. And so the timeless rebirth that Christ promised would change the world is slow to come, because we have adopted a rebirth based upon time, and that rebirth is not a transformation for most. It's a set of rules to fight against the slave technology with a new set of rules within it. But there is a state of consciousness transformation that can put to sleep the slave technology, and with it gives you great clarity as these issues arise within you, as lust comes up, as greed, as power. Instead of seeing them and the word, I'm lustful, you see the energy rising, and in seeing the energy and seeing the artifact, not the word we've used to point at that part of our technology, you can dissipate it. You can disable it. And this is the power of the awakened state, is how I perceive it. This is the power of overcoming the slave technology, or as the Essenes pointed, the lion. God bless, guys. Be well. Bye.